It's nice when things go right, when someone searches for a location and we're able to find a match, or when someone asks for the weather for a set of coordinates and we're able to get and display the forecast. Now, we always hope that things go right, but that's not always the case. There are plenty of things that could go wrong with our HTTP requests, and in this video, we're going to focus on handling those potential errors, giving the user a better experience when things don't go as expected. Together, we'll set up error handling for the weather API request, then as your challenge for the video, you'll be setting up error handling for our geocoding request. For the moment, I'm going to comment out all of the geocoding related information down below by using command /, which would be control / on Windows when I have all of those lines selected. And we're going to focus on what we have up above, just the weather request. Now, one really obvious way things can go wrong when making an HTTP network request is if there's no network available. If you're not connected to the internet, this is indeed going to fail. Let's go ahead and see this in action. Up above, I'm going to temporarily turn off my Wi-Fi, and all we're going to do is run our script. So from the terminal, node space app.js. When I do this, what do I get? I get a really long error message, and the actual error says cannot read property body of undefined. So in this case, when things go wrong and there is no network request, the error argument contains a value and response does not. So we have to go ahead and add a little bit of conditional logic, making sure we're checking that there is no error before we try to interact with the response. Right now, it's trying to read body of undefined right here. Response is indeed undefined, and that's what's causing the problem. Now, once again, we can't fix the lack of network connectivity. That's not the job of error handling. In our case, the goal is to do something a bit better than this. Tell them in a regular, human-readable way that they currently don't have access to the weather API. So to get that done, we're going to add an if statement right inside of our function. Before we do, let's go ahead and just console.log the error argument to the console so we can see exactly what we're dealing with, and I'm going to comment out the line down below which is currently causing the program to crash. Now I will clear the terminal output, rerun the command, and what do we end up getting? We end up getting an error message. Now, what's inside of here is not as bad as what we had before, but it still doesn't contain information that would be useful to someone unless they really knew a good deal about programming. So what we're going to do is just check for the existence of that error object. Right here, the if statement, if there is an error, we're going to do one thing, otherwise, inside of the else statement, we'll do something else. Now, if there is an error, we're going to go ahead and print a statement using console.log, something that a person would actually understand. Let's try unable to connect to weather service. Excellent. Now that we have that message showing up, we can fill out the else part of the if statement. In this case, we want to print our forecast exactly like we were already doing. So I'll uncomment out that line down below. I'm then going to take the entire thing, cut it out of its current location, remove the extra lines, and paste it right here inside of else. So if error, print an error message, otherwise print that forecast. Now let's go ahead and try things out again. From the terminal down below, I'm going to rerun the program, and what do I get? Unable to connect to weather service showing up, which is a great step in the right direction. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and make sure that our app still works when the network when the network connectivity is re-enabled. So right here, I am going to re-enable Wi-Fi once again. I'll wait just a couple of seconds, then we'll rerun the script down below. This time, there should not be an error, and response should indeed show up. So right here, I am going to fire that off, and what do I get? I get my forecast clear throughout the day. It is currently 57.75 degrees with a 0% chance of rain. And there we go. Now we have a little bit of error handling in our program, making sure that when things don't go well, we at least give the user information that's useful. So in summary, we have these two arguments, error and response. Only one is ever going to be populated, the other is going to be undefined. So if we have a value for error, there's not going to be a value for response. If I have a value for response, we're not going to have a value for error. So that's why our condition works so well. If there is an error, then we know we have one and we'll print the message. If there's no error, then we know by definition we have a response and we can go ahead and use it. Now, this isn't the only type of error we want to guard against. The other relates to user input. What if we get a bad set of coordinates? That's not going to be handled given our current setup. Let's go ahead and explore that by cracking open the URL in the browser. So what I'm going to do is take this URL, copy it to the clipboard, and for the moment, we're going to take it over to Chrome. So I'm going to open it up in a new tab like we did a few videos ago. And what do I get back? I get back the weather forecast as expected. Now let's go ahead and mess up the input in the URL up above. We could go ahead and demonstrate this by removing the longitude from the URL up above. I'm going to fire off the request, and what do we get back? We do not get back a forecast because we haven't provided enough information for Dark Sky to know where we want to get the forecast for. This is Andrew with a quick update for the WeatherStack API. We can also break this API, though to get that done, we have to make a slightly different change. So right here, we have our URL. On the far right, we have our query. In order to break the WeatherStack API, we'll just remove both the latitude and the longitude. So right here, we set query equal to nothing, and if I hit enter and fire off this request, we can see that we don't get back a forecast. Instead, we're getting back an error. Right here, please specify a valid location identifier using the query parameter. So this is the approach we can take to generate an error when working with the WeatherStack API. So in this case, we do indeed get a response with two properties. We have the code property and the error property on the response body. And in this case, we need to add a little bit of defensive programming to make sure we print a useful error message to the user in this situation. So it's important to note that when we have invalid input, the server in this case for Dark Sky, might respond, and it's going to respond with data that might be considered an error, but it's not going to populate this error object. This is used for lower level OS things like the complete lack of a network connection. If the specific server you're contacting can't find the exact data you need, that's typically going to come back on the response body. So right here, we want to add an else if clause to our if statement to look at response and see if there's an error code set up. If there is, we'll print a different error message saying something like unable to find location. Otherwise, once again, we'll continue to print the forecast if we actually have the data we need. Right here, before the else, I'm going to hit enter a couple of times, adding some new lines. We'll bring that back into the picture in just a moment. And on to the end of the current if statement, we're going to add on an else if clause. So we'll have our condition and the code to run if that condition is true. Now I can back the else clause up to the end of else if. So if there is a low-level OS error, we're going to print this message. If this thing happens, we'll do something else in a second. Otherwise, we'll print the forecast. Now, in this case, we are going to look at response.body, and we're going to see if that error property exists. If it does, we know that something has gone wrong. So right here, we can use console.log to print a message. And in this case, let's do something like unable to find location. Unable to find location. Now we have some pretty decent error handling set up. If things fail at a low level, we're going to make sure we get that message. If things go wrong with the input, we'll get another message. And finally, if everything goes right, we will indeed get our forecast showing up. Let's go ahead and test things out. So over here, what I'm going to do is break the URL exactly like we broke it over there. I'm going to remove the comma and the longitude, leaving just the latitude in place. This is Andrew with a reminder that for the WeatherStack API to break things, we had to remove both the latitude and the longitude. So right here, I can remove both of those. So I have query equals nothing. Then I set up my other query parameter for units. This is what we'll need to do to break things using WeatherStack. Now let's go ahead and save the script, and down below we're going to rerun the program. So node app.js. Now I do have a network connection, so there should not be a low-level error, but in this case I do have invalid input, so I would expect this condition to run. I'm going to fire off the command, and what do I get down below? Unable to find location. So now we have some pretty decent error handling set up, allowing us to catch a lot of these edge cases. Now, if we go ahead and fix things, I'll add a comma on, and I believe it was something like -112 or 122. We can go ahead and save the program, rerun things for a final time, and ensure we are still getting the weather. Clearly, I was off. It got a lot colder in a short period of time, but we do indeed have a valid coordinate pair, and we are indeed getting to the end. No low-level errors, no problems with the input, which means we print the forecast. Now it's challenge time, where you're going to do the same thing for our geocoding request. So to kick things off, I am going to comment out all of the code related to our weather request. We'll obviously come back to that soon. I'm just commenting it out so we don't have a bunch of different things printing to the terminal. And down below, we are going to uncomment the code for the geocoding API request. Now right here, I had a couple comments to illustrate exactly how geocoding was going to fit into the big picture. I'm going to remove those, and this is where I will paste in the challenge comments. Now in this case, it's going to be your job to set up error handling for the geocoding request, and there are 4 steps for getting this done. Step 1, you want to set up an error handler for low-level errors. So that's when the error argument exists and the response does not. In that case, you can print a message like unable to connect to location services. Now, once you have that in place, I'd like you to test your work by disabling your network request and making sure that when you run the app, you see that error message print instead of seeing a really long cryptic stack trace. Now, inside of the else clause, you're going to continue to do whatever you're currently doing. So that handles the first type of error. The other one is to set up an error handler when there's no matching results, and we're going to explore that right now by taking our URL from the browser and messing it up. So over here in my other tab, I had the URL we explored when we initially set up geocoding, and if you remember, the search term sits right here. So it is /geocoding/v5/mapbox.places/yoursearchterm.json. So in our case, we're searching for Los Angeles. If I search for something like 12, what am I going to get back? I get back the following. We still have those same 4 root properties: type, query, features, and attribution. Though you'll notice that this time around, features is an empty array. So if we are getting an empty array, obviously we're not going to be able to look in that array like we're doing right here to pull out the latitude and longitude. So you want to set up an else if like we did above, but you want to check if the features array has a length of 0. If it does, you want to go ahead and print a message saying something like unable to find location, try again with different search term. Then you want to go ahead and actually test that out by messing up the URL over here to generate 0 search results, running the program, and making sure you see that message print. So just to demonstrate, if I do swap out Los Angeles in the URL right here with something like 12 what and save the file, I can indeed rerun the script down below. And what do I get? We're back to a big ugly stack trace, the problem being that there is no center property on undefined. Undefined being the object we're trying to access, which does not exist in the features array, because in this case, the features array has 0 items inside. I'm going to undo that change, bringing the search term back to a valid one. Now it's time for you to knock this one out. Take a moment to pause the video, test your work, and when you're done, come back and click play and we'll work through the solution together. How'd that go? I'm going to start with step 1 and ensure that we're handling those low-level errors. So right here, what am I going to do? I am going to start by disabling my network connection. I'm going to turn off Wi-Fi. Then if we were to rerun the program, obviously things would indeed fail. Let's take a quick moment to do just that. I'll use the up arrow key and enter. And what do I get? I get the very long cryptic message saying that there is no response, so we can't access the body property on it. We can address this by adding the if statement in. If there is an error, then we know we want to print a message. Otherwise, inside of else, we know there's a response and we can go ahead and do what we were doing before. So I'm going to take these 3 lines. You might have had just one if you chose to solve that challenge in a different way. I'm going to cut them out and bring them up inside of else. Once we have that in place, we can go ahead and pick an error message for when there is no network connection. Right here, a console.log call to print something, and I'll use something like unable to connect to location services. Excellent. Now that we have this in place, we've finished step 1, at least hopefully, and we can test things out down below. Once again, I'll use the up arrow key and enter to run the script, and right here, we get unable to connect to location services. Now, if I was to re-enable my network connection, I would expect that we do indeed get a latitude and longitude printing. I'm going to rerun the program with the network enabled, and what do I get right here? I do indeed get my coordinates, which is awesome. Next up, we want to make sure that when the search term returns no results, we do indeed print a message letting them know we can't find that location. First up, let's recreate this error by messing up that search term. I'm going to remove Los Angeles. I'll replace it with some mumbo jumbo like 12 followed by the word what. And now if we were to rerun the program once again, we would be back into a failing state, and that's okay because we're going to address it in just a moment. Right here, cannot read property center of undefined. So the undefined thing is the object we're trying to access from the features array. The features array is empty in this case, as we saw, so there is not going to be an object, and that object doesn't exist, so it definitely won't have a center property. To address this, all we're going to do is add else if like we did before. I'll move else down below for just a moment, add else if with a condition and some code to run when that condition passes, then I'll bring the else clause back into the mix, tacking it on to the end. Excellent. Now, what's the condition? In this case, we want to run this code printing another error message if the array is empty. So if response dot body dot features has a length equal to 0. If it does, that's a problem, and we're going to print a message. Console dot log. I'll print something like unable to find location. Try another search. Perfect. Now that we have this in place, we can move on to the final step, which is to make sure we actually see this message when that array is empty. I'm going to go ahead and rerun the program once again, and what do I get? Unable to find location. Try another search. Now let's wrap things up by bringing it back to a working state. I'm going to remove 12 and what? It'll be / Philadelphia.json. I'm going to save the program. That should indeed return a result. And if I rerun the program, I would expect to see the coordinates for Philadelphia, and that is exactly what I'm getting. So error handling isn't the most fun thing to add to your application, but it goes a long way towards making sure you have a professional setup where users actually understand what's happening if things fail. For the moment, I am going to remove those challenge comments and save the file. That's where we're going to stop for this one. We now have a pretty good setup printing the nice results when we get them, but obviously sometimes we don't go down that happy path, and in this case we are indeed also handling those errors. That's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.